sin and a peace that endures. so grateful for Dave and for Dan for preaching the last couple of weeks. I'm not back to full schedule yet, but my mouth works, but the rest of my body doesn't. But I want to tell you, my phone works, and my praying works. So don't hesitate to call me. Just don't call me and ask me to move you, because I can't move anybody yet. In fact, as I recall, in the literature they gave me, the doctor said, I'm not allowed to move anybody for 2 years. And if I can get an extension on that, I'm going to do that. And as I was telling, I think it was Gordon before the service started, it's been 3 weeks since the surgery. We don't go back to see him until 3 more weeks. And I know exactly why they scheduled it that way. Because if he'd asked me to come back a week later, I'd have punched him in the face. If it had been 2 weeks later, I'd have been tempted to punch him in the face, and Brenda probably could have restrained me, but I still might have done it anyways. My guess is after 6 weeks, I won't want to punch him anymore. And also, I'm really grateful that he did not do something I asked him to do. Before the surgery, when he came in to see me, I said, could you do a little liposuction in my abdomen as well while you're doing that? I am really glad he did not do that. Because my guess is it would have hurt even more. So I think that goes in the category of those prayers that aren't answered, because they wouldn't be good for you anyways. Speaking of punching people in the face, maybe you felt like doing that before. Maybe you've even done it. And Dan was talking about relationships, and some people are so nice, and some people are so hard to get along with. Sometimes it leads to this very common situation. A disagreement turns into a dispute, which escalates into a feud, and may even turn into a vendetta. Sometimes it even crosses generations. You've heard of the Hatfields and the McCoys, and you've heard of the Middle East, have you? Yeah. It usually involves the very best in us. Loyalty, and friendship, and fraternity. But it also brings out the very worst in us. Bitterness and unforgiveness and revenge. We live in a world where people will misuse us, hurt us, cheat us, harm us. How do we cope? We are listening to Jesus teach us from Luke chapter 6. In this next section, he addresses it directly. He speaks to us when we are tempted to settle our problems by taking a pound of flesh from somebody. He teaches us, however, a better way to handle it, a more perfect way, a way that is more powerful and that handles the evil that's thrown at us. And so here's the text from Luke chapter 6, starting with verse 27. But I tell you who hear me, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. It's a challenging, difficult path to walk. Maybe we should lay this out before somebody, before they even make the decision to become a Christian. Before they decide to take that plunge of baptism and say, are you really willing to embrace this? It'll probably take a lifetime for you to fully perform it, but are you willing to embrace it? He says, love, do good, bless, pray for those who are your enemies. Our instincts say strike back, deal with it quickly, make them pay for what they've done. We seethe with anger and resentment and bitterness and even hatred. Let me ask you this. Is someone on your dirt list that person that when you run into them, it ruins your day? It brings up all kinds of emotions and memories that makes you want to hate again? Do you find that nasty, mean person you react to instead of acting the way you want to? And later on you look at it and say, what was that about? What did I do? In those moments, it's easy to forget who you are and fixate on what they've done to you. And when that happens, you start to be twisted. You don't need to have that kind of person in your mind controlling you, because that's exactly what it leads to. It's like saying to someone, I'm going to turn over the keys to my life to you, and you can drive it. And we hate the outcome from that, instead of us taking control. Now, once again, our instinctive way of taking control is to destroy them. It's to take vengeance on them. It's to do to them worse than they've done to us, so they will never try to do what they've done to us again. And that's not what Jesus says to do. Of course, you see, he knows. He knows that if we do that, then the cycle of evil will just continue. And not only will we not escape it, we will become part of the evil system. I thought about this, and I thought about really kind of a philosophy of life that I've developed. One that is also not easy to live, but it comes from this teaching from Christ. If you choose to be my enemy, so be it. I do not choose to be yours. We might be a victim, but we don't have to let that become our identity. And when we do, the person who harmed us takes control. There's a classic story about a man selling newspapers and magazines and, packs of gum and stuff on the street in a little kiosk in New York City. Busy mornings, people on their way to work stop to pick up a paper. They are in a hurry, they are grumpy, they always are rude to him. One man who stops there every day observes this. And after weeks of seeing this man handle these rude people with kindness and respect and wishing them a good day, he says, why do you do that? And how can you do that? And the guy said, I can't control who they are, but I can control who I am. I think that's what Christ calls us to do. This obligation to love people, even those who consider themselves our enemies, goes way back. It is not new with Jesus. In fact, much of what Jesus does in his teachings is he shows us the true intent of God on all the Old Testament teaching. This has been God from the beginning. It's the way he wants us to be. Way back in Exodus. And I want you to think about the background for this. Preparing for last Wednesday night's class made me think about this. Israel had been in Egypt for 400 years. Over the first few years, it was during the times of Joseph, and Joseph had saved Israel, had saved Egypt from starvation. And Pharaoh said, bring your family here and let them live here. All they need to eat, we're going to give them the best place to live. Out of gratitude, the Egyptians embraced them. And then Joseph died. And Joseph was forgotten after a century. And the Israelites were thriving and prospering, and they were obeying God, and they were reproducing faster than the Egyptians. And the Egyptians got threatened by that, and so they made them slaves. They took their freedom away. And for 400 years, Israel lived in a pagan land under pagan influence. They worshiped the god Ra, the sun god. They worshipped other gods. The plagues that God put on Egypt, each one represents a different god. That Jehovah is saying, I am sovereign over that fake god. But Israel was living under that influence. And frankly, when they were delivered from slavery in the Exodus and passed through the Red Sea without drowning, they had more of a pagan mindset than a godly, monotheistic belief in the true God. They had been living in a culture that had shaped them. And so God was teaching them to be the people of God. That's what the Ten Commandments are about. And that's what all the other regulations are about that string from those Ten Commandments. And among those are statements like this in Exodus 23. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to take it back to him. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help him with it. What? Does that sound like the kind of regulation that helps the people who are just desperate to survive at any cost? No, God said, you've got a higher purpose. You see, because whether his people at that time remembered Genesis 1:27 or not, God did. I will make man in my own image. And so he made man in his own image. Male and female, he made them in the image of God. He knew that even the enemy of his people were people that he had hand created and had a stake in. And later, in Leviticus 19, the book of regulations, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Now, do you remember how people of Jesus' day handled statements like this? They would ask a question. What question would they ask about it? Who's my neighbor? Surely that guy that lives on the other side of town and would come in and rob from me is not my neighbor. So I don't have to love him. I can seek vengeance on him. That guy on the other side of the world is not my neighbor, surely. But Jesus corrects that, doesn't he? So Jesus says in Luke 6, if somebody really needs your coat and tries to steal it from you, give it to him. And not only that, but give him your sweater. And remember Steve Sargent? And give him your socks. If someone begs from you, help him in the best way possible. Also remember Steve? He didn't say just give money to the beggar. Use wisdom, use real love. Put the time into really helping that person. If someone strikes you on the cheek, don't start a war with him. Be the stronger, better, wiser, more Christ-like person. That is not easy. If I don't teach him a lesson, he'll just do it again. Yeah, he probably will. Anybody here ever been harmed by the same person more than once? Yeah. You know, this whole thing brings up some difficult questions, though. And I don't have all the answers to them. It's a guy named Simon Wiesenthal. Some of you may have heard of Wiesenthal. He became a Nazi hunter. He was a young boy in a German concentration camp. And during part of his incarceration there, he was tasked with carrying out the garbage of this hospital where there were German soldiers. And he was taken to the bedside of a German SS officer named Karl. Karl the Nazi was tormented by the things he had done, including the murder of a family with a little child. Karl was going to die, and he knew it. And he had no peace. And he wanted to confess what he had done to a Jew. I think that he was hoping that he'd receive some kind of absolution, some kind of forgiveness, and he could die in peace. Wiesenthal was a young man brought in with this. He had already lost 89 relatives in the camps. He stood there for a moment and walked out of the room without saying a thing to the man. What would you have done? In fact, 25 years after the Holocaust, Wiesenthal asked leading intellectuals of the day that question, what would you have done? And it led to a book that he wrote called The Sunflower. And the discussions about it bring up questions like, can one person forgive the crime against another victim? Does forgiveness mean the person does not face justice for his crimes? Does forgiving heinous crimes simply perpetuate them? Wiesenthal, this whole incident has defined his life, and I think has haunted him with what does forgiveness mean? And is he going to let that man and those people who harmed him and his family control his life? And so in recent years, Wiesenthal did an update to the book and asked current people, religious leaders and political leaders, what would you have done? And I came up with a new edition. I think that those questions that are raised by this can only be contemplated with the background of the cross. I think that Luke chapter 6, verses 27 and following can only be understood, can only be lived under the cross. The matter of loving your enemy, of having a caring for your enemy that causes you to do something to help them, blessing those who curse you, praying for those who mistreat you, giving more to the person who steals from you than he even took, that can only be lived under the cross. If you'll remember, while he was hanging on the cross, Jesus looked down on the people who were executing him and say, Father, teach them a lesson. Didn't he? He didn't. What did he say? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. I look at that scene and I said, sure they knew what they were doing. No, they didn't. And I don't think that those who harm us fully know what they're doing. Did those people know that they were killing the very Son of God? The one who made them? The one who sustained their lives? The one who gave them their beautiful wives and their adoring children. Did they know that? Did they know that in coming years they would look back on that moment with shame? Did they know that some of them would have become believers in Jesus and spent the rest of their lives trying to out-adore Jesus beyond everybody else because they knew what they had done? They didn't know what they were doing. And some of them who rejected him, could they grasp what hell was like? And spending eternity in hell, regretting the fact that they crucified the Holy One, the Son of God. They didn't know what they were doing. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them. In his worst moment of agony, when not only was his body screaming in pain, but his soul was screaming in pain because he was taking on all of our sins. He said, Father, forgive them. Many of you have been in pain. I was thinking about you a couple of weeks ago. When I was in pain, I was thinking about you. I was thinking, Patty Cotton's been through a whole lot worse than I'm going through. You whipped him. I was thinking Gordon had his abdomen cut open to save him from cancer. What are you crying about? I thought about people who live in pain constantly, incessantly, every day. I thought about people who've had surgeries that altered their lives forever. Jesus is hanging on the cross. He's not thinking about himself. He says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. He was talking to us, wasn't he? And about us. This statement he made on the cross did not grant automatic forgiveness to everybody involved in his death. It took a decision on their part. It took repentance. It took faith in Jesus. But he gave them that gift, that opportunity, that treasure that only needed to be opened if they would put aside their pride and put their trust in him. And some did, and they're in heaven now. And we're going to meet them one day. And we're going to say, you're one of those guys he was talking about. Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they're doing. They may be the first ones to meet us after Jesus does. Say, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so sorry what I did to the Savior, but he used it to save us. But many did not believe in him. Jesus paid the eternal price of his enemies, of the ones who said, I'm your enemy, even though he said to him, I will not be your enemy. If you follow this teaching, will it mean you live in peace with everybody? No. Here's a statement in Romans 12. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with all men. There is a limit. But that means we need to do our part. As long as we live in this fallen world, we're going to encounter people who act out of selfishness and envy and anger and deception. But we can win that battle if we choose to act like the forgiven instead of like the fallen. We need to choose who we're going to be and not define ourselves by what somebody else has done to us. And we need to stand under the cross to do that. Is that where you live? Is your life oriented to that cross? That's what needs to happen.
My eyes are dry, my faith is cold, my heart Till we meet.